In her book, Wired for Story, Lisa Cron says that human beings understand and interpret the world around them via stories. I have loved stories for as long as I can remember, but there are two moments in my life where I realized how important they truly were. The first of those moments occurred early on in my storytelling journey. I had recently seen Indiana Jones for the first time, Raiders and Last Crusade only because my parents wouldn't let me watch Temple of Doom. And I was enthralled by Indiana Jones. I loved it. Between Indiana Jones and Star Wars, I basically owe George Lucas a lot. Around that same time, my family got some pretty tough news. My mom, who at the time was younger than I am now, got stage 3 super aggressive breast cancer, and she had to have surgery and intense chemotherapy. And like many of you might have experienced already who have gone through cancer battles with loved ones, that's really, really tough. The chemotherapy was really hard on her. I was the oldest of 3 boys and had barely just become a teenager, so she basically has like preteen boys to deal with. I'm sure that was not easy for her. It certainly wasn't easy for us. But that wasn't all. Around that same time, within a year of my mom getting cancer, 2 of my friends who lived within a block of my house had tragedies strike their families too. Both of their moms passed away, 2 of my different friends. And I remember in those days, we would escape to stories. Indiana Jones and Star Wars, for sure. Spider-Man and Batman were a couple of my favorites as well. And that was at least a reprieve, a chance to momentarily forget that life was pretty challenging for us. But I also remember having to go to bed, turn the lights off, and be totally alone. Because you can't escape forever. You can't escape to those stories forever. And I remember in those moments when the distractions were gone, when those stories were gone, I remember realizing that those stories weren't really enough. Despite the fact that they had things to say about how the universe worked and how they could support me and help me escape, they weren't necessarily enough to give me a broader hope in some contexts. And that's important for the next stage of my journey. Because while those stories were valuable for that time, I also thought there could be more to storytelling that I really wanted to explore. Now, I was one of the lucky ones of the 3 friends that I referenced earlier because my mom went into remission after that long battle with cancer. She came out on top for a period of time. She was healthy again. And at first, it was hard to trust that she was healthy because it felt like cancer might come back at any minute. But after a while, that fear kind of slipped away into the background and it wouldn't be top of mind. So for the next 15 years or so, we didn't have to deal with cancer. And I started to write stories that were really more pure entertainment. Fast-moving plots and fun twists and turns. Nathan SCHECK and I teamed up to write a serial adventure story about time travel. We took the concept of the old newspaper serials where they came out with a story every single week, and we adjusted that for mobile reading devices. Not to mention the brand new invention at the time, smartphones. And that was our first story, Time Slingers. It has some deeper threads if you really want to pull on them a little bit, but it's really more about entertainment than anything else. But as we were getting ready to self-publish that serial story, Time Slingers, I got some bad news. My mom's cancer had come back, and it had spread to her spine. And if you know anything about cancer, there are certain areas where if the cancer spreads, it's not good. Spine is really one of those places. And that second cancer journey was a lot harder than the first. Yeah, I was an adult now, and I had even been married. I had a house that I had purchased, but we all sort of knew, like our whole family, we knew that it was going to be harder this time, and it was harder this time. I realized too that I had forgotten how hard it had been the first time around, and it really came to a head when in 2012 my mom passed away, and I realized that I didn't want to tell stories that only provided an escape from reality. Not that that's bad. I love those stories. But I wanted to tell stories that could somehow help us cope with reality, no matter how hard that reality actually got, because it got pretty difficult for me. I wanted to tell stories for me and my friends that weren't just escapism, but also offered some form of hope. Or if not hope, then a perspective on grief or despair that could provide a shared experience. Now, don't get me wrong, I still want to produce stories about Nazis getting punched in the face like Indiana Jones, but I want to infuse those stories with something more. Now, for me, that's some element of exploring the spiritual. Do virtues like justice, peace, and love really exist? Or do we just tell ourselves they exist? Why do we want so badly for those virtues to exist? And then what answers lie beyond all of those questions? I believe that stories can really help us process those questions and come to some understandings that might help us out. My mom's cancer, along with other significant milestones in my life, changed my storytelling, and it was a meaningful change. Before that, I had a couple of stories published in science fiction anthologies. But after that, I got interested in screenwriting, and I was able to have 3 short film scripts placed in the top 10 of the Rite of Passage screenplay competition. I helped write and produce a couple short films, and like I mentioned, we self-published Slingers. We even had a Writer's Digest judge tell us that the unique format of Slingers might give it a place in literary history. I don't think that has happened, at least not yet, but it was cool to hear someone acknowledge what we were attempting to do and that it was new and different, even though it was inspired by old, classic newspaper serials. In 2016, Nathan and I started our nonprofit production company, the Reclamation Society, and released our first short film. So Star Wars Rivals was born and is hosted on the How Stories Work YouTube channel, and that's an anti-bullying fan film. But unlike the fan films you might see as like an after-school special or a PSA, it doesn't really have a happy ending, because sometimes people who are getting bullied don't have happy endings, and we wanted to have that shared experience. So with the advent of the Reclamation Society and then moving into Star Wars Rivals, that really started to take our storytelling in a different direction. We wanted to say deeper things about the world. We wanted to have an impact on people who would be either watching, reading, or listening to our stories. More recently, we took on another project based on a short film I had written way back in 2012. Nathan and I decided to take Death of a Bounty Hunter because I had just listened to the full cast audiobook of American Gods, and I thought we should do a full cast audiobook ourselves. So we wrote one. Death of a Bounty Hunter became a self-published novel and a full cast audiobook. The novel version of Death of a Bounty Hunter has gone on to be in the top 13% of projects on Coverfly. That's out of 45,000 projects on Coverfly. It's in the top 13%. It also earned a semi-finalist spot in Screencraft's cinematic book competition and a quarter-finalist spot in the Script to Comics 2021 competition. As you can see, my journey as a writer and a storyteller has taken many twists and turns, but at its core, it's been a process of learning how to understand and interpret the world around me, just like Lisa Cron talked about in the book Wired for Story, because that's what stories are really built to do. And if that's true, which I firmly believe it is, that the human brain is wired for storytelling, there's neurological research to suggest that it is true, then storytellers have a distinct obligation to explore and express the truth. Maybe it's not just about entertainment, maybe it's about something more, maybe it's about having an impact. Not that entertainment's bad, not that escapism is bad, but what if we were to take that entertainment and escapism and then broaden it to reach more people with a bigger impact? If storytellers are telling stories that literally transform the minds of their audiences, the implications are staggering. I hope that you will join me on my journey to learn to tell better stories. And along the way, I hope your life is transformed in your pursuit of storytelling. If you want to find out more about how stories work or engage with any of the stories I've written, check out the links below. Thanks for watching. Now let's go tell impactful stories.